There's a sound a dog makes that you learn to ignore: the squirrel bark, the deer bark, the bark at nothing. And then there's the other one. The one that comes up from somewhere deeper, the one that says, "Come now, come fast. There is no time to put your boots on right." My dog made that sound on the coldest morning of my life. I want to tell you what we found in that cabin. I want to tell you about the rope and the breath and the eyes that had given up before I got there. But mostly, I want to tell you about the thing I almost didn't do. The moment I stood in a doorway with the cold biting my teeth and a choice in front of me that I have never stopped paying for, in the good way and the bad. If you've ever been too late for something that mattered, stay with me. Because this isn't a story about being a hero. I'm not one. This is a story about an old animal that was left to die in the dark, and the stubborn, frostbitten, completely ordinary people who refuse to let the dark have the last word. Listen close. The first part is the part everyone gets wrong. I knew it was bad because Cooley didn't come get me first. That was the thing. Any other morning, any normal trouble, a coyote at the fence line, a steer down in the wash, and that dog would come scratch the kitchen door, look back over his shoulder, do the whole follow-me routine he'd done since he was a pup. Cooley was a talker, always had been. 12 years of him telling me about his day whether I asked or not. But that morning he just stood out at the tree line, north of the barn where the land starts to climb, and he barked himself raw at the dark. I stood at the window with my coffee going cold in my hands, and I told myself it was nothing. I'm good at that. Telling myself it's nothing. I've had a lot of practice. The thermometer nailed to the porch post read 11 below, and the sky over the ridge had that flat, bruised look it gets before real snow, the kind that doesn't fall so much as it descends, like a decision being made about you from far away. "Cooley," I called. "Hey, knock it off." He didn't even turn his head. And that, more than the cold, more than the sky, was what finally made me set the cup down. I want to be honest about something before I go any further, because if I don't say it now, I'll be tempted to make myself sound better than I was. I didn't go out there out of kindness. I went out there because the dog wouldn't stop, and I wanted my morning back. That's the truth. I was 58 years old, my knees were shot, my wife had been gone 2 winters, and the last thing in the world I wanted was to climb that ridge in the dark for whatever dead thing my dog had found. I am telling you this so you understand. The people in this story are not special. We were just close enough to hear. I pulled on the good coat, the one Marie bought me the Christmas before the last one, the one I still couldn't throw out even though the lining had given up. Boots. Gloves with the right thumb worn through. I took the rifle off the rack out of habit more than expectation, and then I stood there a second with my hand on the door, the way you do, listening to a dog tell you the world had changed and not wanting to believe him. Then I went out. The cold up here doesn't hurt right away. That's the trick of it. It comes on polite. It shakes your hand. It's only later, when your fingers stop sending mail and your face goes stiff as a board, that you understand it was never your friend. The snow from 2 nights back had crusted over hard, and my boots punched through it with every step, a sound like breaking dishes, crunch, crunch, loud in a silence that had no business being that complete. Cooley heard me coming and his bark changed, sharpened, got that edge of finally. He was standing maybe 40 yards up, at the edge of where my land stops mattering and the national forest begins, and he was looking at the old Renner place. Now, the Renner place. I have to tell you about it because the whole thing turns on it. There used to be a man named Avery Renner who ran sheep on the far side of the ridge, and when his lungs went bad in the 80s, he sold off the flock and most of the land but kept a little cabin tucked into the lee of the slope, where the wind cuts around instead of through. He died up there alone one February, and nobody found him until the thaw. After that, the cabin just sat. The county owned it for back taxes, then the Forest Service took the surrounding acreage, and the building itself became one of those structures that everyone agrees is somebody else's problem. Hunters used it sometimes. Kids, once or twice before the road washed out. Mostly it just stood there in the trees, going gray, the way a thing goes gray when it has stopped expecting anyone. I hadn't walked up to it in maybe 3 years. There was no reason to. But there was smoke. Not much. A thread of it pale against the paler sky, coming up crooked from the stovepipe and bending east in the high wind. My first thought, God help me, was trespassers, and my hand tightened on the rifle, and I felt that mean little flare of a man whose solitude has been disturbed. I almost turned around. Let it be somebody else's problem, like everyone always had. Cooley looked at me. 12 years old, white in the muzzle, breath coming out of him in hard little clouds. He looked at me, and then he looked at the cabin, and then he looked at me again, and I swear to you there is no other way to describe it. The dog was disappointed in how long I was taking. "All right," I said. "All right, you old fool, show me." The closer I got, the more wrong it felt, and I couldn't say why at first. Then I figured it out. There was a smell. Not wood smoke, that I'd seen coming. Underneath the smoke was something animal and close and frightened, that thick ammonia warmth of a creature that has been shut in a small space too long. And there was a sound too, now that I was near enough, a sound I'd been hearing for a few seconds before my brain agreed to name it. A low, rhythmic, exhausted moan. The sound an animal makes when it has been making the sound for a long time and has mostly stopped believing the sound will be answered. Hun, 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 spaced out, failing. I knew that kind of sound. Anyone who's worked livestock knows it. It's the sound of giving up that hasn't quite finished giving up. The cabin door was shut but not latched, banging soft against the frame in the wind. There was a window beside it, the glass gone milky with age and frost, and I went to it first because that's what a careful man does, and I cupped my torn glove against it and I looked in. I've replayed that next half-second maybe 10,000 times. Through the frost and the bad glass and the dimness I saw a shape in the middle of the floor. Big, low, wrong-angled. For a stupid moment I thought furniture, a fallen table, a heap of hides. Then the shape lifted its head slow, so slow, like the head weighed more than the whole rest of it, and I was looking into the eye of a donkey. A donkey! In a dead man's cabin, in the middle of the national forest, 11 below zero, tide. I could see the rope from there. It ran from a halter on its head to something low and fixed near the cold wood stove, pulled taut, and the animal was down on its side in a way no healthy animal lies, its legs out stiff, its barrel heaving with that awful spaced-out rhythm. There was a little fire in the stove. Somebody had been here. Somebody had built it, but the fire was nearly out, just coals, and the cold was winning the cabin back inch by inch. The donkey looked at me through the window with one enormous dark eye, and I want to tell you something I'm not proud of and have never said out loud. My first feeling was not pity. My first feeling was no. No, not this, not today, I can't. Because I knew what was on the other side of that door. I knew what saving a thing costs, and how it doesn't always work, and how a man who has already buried more than his share doesn't go looking for one more grave to stand beside. I'd put a horse down with my own hands the spring Marie got sick, and I'd told myself I was done being the one who has to decide. And the donkey moaned again, hun, and put its head back down on the cold board floor slow, like a door closing. That sound finished what the dog had started. I went in. The smell hit me full in the face, hot and rank and desperate, and the heat, what little of it the dying coals still gave, fogged my glasses instantly so that for a second I was blind in the dark with a suffering thing I couldn't see. I yanked the glasses off, stuffed them in my pocket, and there in the gray light from the open door I got my first real look. It was an old donkey. I could see that right away. Gray going white around the muzzle and over the eyes, the same as my dog, the way age frosts you from the face inward. It was thin, not skeletal, not weeks of starvation thin, but thin in the way of an animal that hasn't eaten in a couple of days and has been burning everything it had just to stay warm and afraid. The rope from its halter was short, cruelly short. Whoever tied it had run the lead through an old iron ring bolted into the floor by the stove, a ring that had probably once held Avery Renner's dog, and they had tied it close, so close the donkey could lie down but couldn't fully turn, couldn't reach the bucket I now saw tipped over in the corner, couldn't do anything but stand or lie in the one spot and wait. There was hay. That was the thing that broke something open in me. There was a flake of hay thrown down maybe 4 feet away, 4 feet, just outside the reach of the rope, and you could see, in the scattered straw and the gouges in the floorboards, how the animal had fought for it, how it had pulled and strained and reached with its whole neck for food it could see and smell and never touch. Someone had left it hay. Someone had left it just out of reach. And I didn't know yet whether that was cruelty or carelessness or a mistake made in a hurry by someone with their own troubles. And that not knowing is, in some ways, the whole rest of this story. I knelt down by its head. My knees screamed. I didn't care. "Hey," I said, "stupid. What do you say to a donkey? Hey now, easy, easy, old-timer." The eye rolled toward me. There was still something in it. That's what I'll never forget. By every right that eye should have been empty by then, should have been the flat shine of an animal already halfway gone. But it wasn't. It looked at me, and it was scared, and it was tired down past the bottom of tired, and it was, I'm going to use the word and you can think what you want, it was asking. Cooley came in behind me, pressed himself against my side, shaking, and let out one short whine and then went quiet. He lay down in the doorway where he could watch us both, and he stayed there. 12 years old, smartest creature I've ever known. He knew his job was done. He'd brought me. The rest was mine. I got my knife out and cut the rope. I should have done a dozen things first. I should have built the fire up, should have gone for water, should have thought it through. But I cut the rope first because in that moment the rope was the cruelty. The rope was the thing that had been done to this animal, and I wanted it off. The frayed end fell away, and the donkey's head sagged with the sudden slack, and it let out a breath, a long, shuddering breath, the kind you let out when something you'd braced against for a long time finally stops. Then I set about the fire, because a warm corpse is still a corpse, and the cold was the thing that was actually killing it now. I won't pretend the next hour was dramatic. Survival rarely is. It's mostly just dull, hard, repetitive work done by someone too cold and scared to feel heroic. I fed the stove with the split wood somebody had left stacked by the wall, and I noted that too, filed it away. Somebody left wood. Somebody meant for this to be possible, and I got a real fire roaring, and the cabin began grudgingly to forgive us. I dragged that flake of hay over and held it under the donkey's nose. For a long, terrible moment it did nothing, just breathed. And I thought, I'm too late, I came all this way and I'm too late, same as I'm always too late. And then the gray lips moved, a whiskery, searching, fumbling movement. And it took a mouthful of hay and began, very slowly, the way an old creature does everything, to chew. I have seen a lot of things in 58 years on this kind of land. I have seen a foal stand up for the first time. I have seen lightning split a tree clean down the middle. I held my wife's hand in a hospital and felt the exact moment it stopped holding back. I'm not sure any of it hit me the way that small, wet sound of an old donkey chewing did. Alone in a dead man's cabin with my dog in the doorway, and the snow finally coming down outside. I sat down on the cold floor next to it, put my back against the rough boards, and for a while I just stayed there, one hand resting on its bony shoulder, feeling it breathe, feeling the breaths come a little easier, a little deeper, as the warmth crept back in and the hay did its slow work and the fear in that big dark eye banked down low like the coals had been. That's when I saw the paper. It was on the little shelf above the stove, weighted under a smooth river stone so the draft wouldn't take it, folded once, the kind of cheap notebook paper a kid uses for school. And even before I reached up and took it down, before I unfolded it with hands that had finally started to shake now that the worst was over, I had the cold understanding that the why of all this, the rope, the hay just out of reach, the fire built by someone who then walked away, was about to stop being a mystery. The handwriting was a child's. That was the first thing before any of the words landed. The letters leaned every which way, too big, pressed so hard in places the pencil had nearly torn through, and a couple of them had been started, abandoned, and written over. A kid who didn't write much. A kid who'd had to think about how to spell things. I held it up to the light from the door and read it slow, and I'm going to give it to you the way it was, because cleaning it up would be a kind of lie. Whoever finds Pip. His name is Pip. He is 31 years old. That is very old for a donkey. He is the best one. I am sorry I had to leave him. I did not want to. My grandpa said we can't take him, and there was no more time, and the man would not take him either. I made a fire and gave him hay and water. Please, if you find him, please don't let him be alone. He gets scared in the dark. He likes his ears scratched, and he likes apples cut up small because his teeth are bad. His name is Pip. Please, I am sorry. I am so sorry. There was no name signed. Just at the very bottom, pressed so hard the paper had given way. I am sorry, I am sorry, I am sorry. The same 3 words running off the edge of the page, like the kid couldn't stop saying it even after they'd run out of room. I sat there with the note in my torn glove and the old donkey breathing against my leg, and I felt the anger I'd been carrying up the ridge. The anger I'd been ready for. The clean, simple anger of a man who's found a creature mistreated and knows exactly who to hate. I felt it go out of me all at once, like the fire when you open the stove door wrong. Because there wasn't anybody to hate. There was just a kid who'd done everything they knew how to do, built a fire, left the hay, left the water, that tipped bucket in the corner, which I now understood had been full when they left it, full and within reach, and the donkey in its blind shifting fear had knocked it over sometime in the long night and then couldn't get to where it spilled. The rope tied close so Pip wouldn't wander out into the cold and die in a drift, tied close to keep him safe. The hay 4 feet off, because a kid doesn't know that a tied animal measures the world in the exact length of its rope, doesn't know that 4 feet might as well be 4 miles. Every cruel thing I'd catalogued on my way to being righteous turned out to be a small hand trying its best in the dark, and getting it almost right. He gets scared in the dark. I looked at Pip, 31 years old. I did the math an old man does without wanting to. 31 years is a kid who's been loving this animal their whole life, and then some. This donkey older than the child by a decade. This donkey that had been somebody's whole childhood, with ears that needed scratching and apples cut up small. Pip, I said, trying it out. The ear nearest me swiveled, just a little, just enough. I need to back up and tell you what I'd missed, because I'd walked into that cabin reading the story all wrong, the way I think most of us read most things, fast, and in our own favor. When I'd come up the ridge, I'd seen one set of trouble, an animal tied and abandoned, open and shut. Somebody did a bad thing, but now I made myself actually look the way I should have from the start, and the cabin told a different story to a man willing to read it. There were 2 bedrolls against the far wall, cheap ones, the kind you get at a discount store, and they'd been slept in recently, the dents still holding shape. There was a camp stove, a couple of cans with the labels half gone, a child's backpack with a cartoon cat on it, empty, unzipped, abandoned in the rush. There were boot prints in the dust by the door, 2 sizes, a grown man's and a small one's. And there was, hung on a nail by the window where the light would catch it, a photograph in a cheap dollar store frame that somebody had taken the time, in the middle of running, to hang up and then leave behind. I got up knees again. God, and went and looked at it. It was a kid, 8 maybe 9, gap in the front teeth, squinting into hard summer sun, arms thrown around the neck of a donkey that even in the photo was clearly old, clearly gray, clearly this donkey, this same Pip with the same white face. And the kid was laughing, not posing, caught mid-laugh, head tipped back, pure and total and unguarded the way only a child laughs at something they love. These weren't people who dumped an inconvenient animal in the woods. These were people who'd been living in a dead man's cabin in the national forest in the dead of winter with 2 cheap bedrolls and a backpack. These were people running from something, or towards something, and the donkey was the thing they could not take with them. And the kid had stood in this room and hung up the photograph and built the fire and written "I am sorry" until the paper gave out. And then somebody, my grandpa said, we can't take him. Somebody had pulled that child away from the only thing they'd ever loved and out into the snow. I thought about the man who would not take him either. Some neighbor, maybe. Some last desperate ask made and refused. The way help so often gets refused, by people with their own full plates, by people like the man I'd nearly been at that window an hour ago, the man who almost turned around. I put the photograph in my coat pocket, careful, next to my fogged-up glasses. I don't know why. I just knew it shouldn't stay in that cabin to gray over with everything else. Here's the part I have to tell you even though I'd rather not. The part where it nearly went the other way. By mid-morning the fire was steady and the cabin was almost warm and Pip had eaten most of the flake of hay and I'd gotten some water into him. I'd melted snow in an old pot on the stove, let it cool, and he'd drunk it down in long greedy pulls that told me how thirsty he'd been, how close the dry had come to finishing what the cold started. I was feeling, I'll admit, pretty good about myself. Pretty close to that hero feeling I told you I'm suspicious of. I'd done it. I'd come up the ridge and I'd saved the donkey, and now I'd figure out how to get him down and Pip tried to stand up. And couldn't. He gathered himself. You could see him decide to do it, see the old will to rise come up in him, and he got his front legs folded under and he heaved, and his back end wouldn't follow. The hindquarters just wouldn't come. He thrashed, scrabbling at the boards, and went back down hard with a grunt that knocked the air out of both of us, and lay there with his sides heaving and that big eye rolling white at the edges. I knew what it might be. Anyone who's been around old stock knows. When an animal that age goes down and stays down, when the back end quits, it can be a lot of things. Some you can fix and some you can't. And the ones you can't are the reason a man keeps a rifle on the rack and learns to do the hardest job there is. I knelt by him. My hands ran over his hindquarters, his hips, his back legs, feeling for heat, for a break, for the wrongness of a bone gone where bone shouldn't go. And I'm not a vet. I'm just an old rancher with 40 years of hands-on an animal's body, and what those hands told me was cold, stiff, cramped down to nothing from a day and a night tied in one spot, unable to move, the muscles seized and the joints locked and the circulation gone sluggish in the deep freeze. Maybe that was all it was, maybe. Or maybe it was the other thing, the thing you can't massage out. And I was kneeling in a cabin 2 miles from my truck with no way to carry a 400-pound animal down an Istover ridge. And the most merciful thing, the responsible thing, the thing the old me, the post-Marie me who'd sworn off being the one to decide, would have done, was sitting on the rack at home, or no, it was right there, I'd carried it up. It was leaning against the wall by the door where I'd set it down to cut the rope. I looked at the rifle. I looked at Pip. I looked at the note still in my hand. Please don't let him be alone. He gets scared in the dark. And I want to be truthful with you, because I promised myself I would. I considered it. I sat there in that cold cabin and I did the cold math. The math that says you are one man, you are 58. Your knees are gone. The snow is coming, and this is a 31-year-old donkey who may not get up no matter what you do. And you have a tool right there that ends suffering cleanly, and you have used it before, and you survived using it. I considered it the way you consider stepping off a high place, not because you want to, but because the logic of it is right there and won't stop talking. And then Cooley, who had not moved from the doorway in 2 hours, got up. He walked over, stiff himself, 12 years old, the cold in his own bones, and he lay down again. This time pressed full length against Pip's back, against that quivering, seized-up spine, and he put his gray muzzle down over the donkey's neck, and he sighed, this enormous old dog sigh, and closed his eyes. Warming him. The dog was warming him, doing the only thing he had to give, which was the heat of his own body and the fact of his own company, so that the scared old animal in the dark would not be alone. I have thought a great deal since about why that undid me when the note hadn't, when the photograph hadn't, when the eye asking me from the floor hadn't quite. I think it's because Cooley didn't do any math. He didn't weigh it. He didn't consider the rifle or the snow or the 2 miles or whether it would even work. He just saw a cold and frightened creature and gave it the one thing he had. No calculation. No exit strategy. The kind of goodness that doesn't know it's being good. I put the rifle back against the wall. "All right," I said, and my voice came out rough. "All right, we'll try. We'll try." So I tried. I'm not going to tell you it worked because of love, or because of the note, or because some old animal found the will to live in my eyes. That's the kind of clean story I don't trust, the kind of over-explained ending the world keeps trying to sell. The truth is messier and slower and has more cursing in it. I worked Pip's legs. For the better part of an hour I knelt on that hard floor and I rubbed and flexed and chafed those old cramped muscles the way you'd work a cold engine, talking the whole time. The kind of low-nonsense talk you use on a panicked animal. "Easy now. There you go, easy, you old fool, come on." The same words I'd used on the dog, the same words, I realized somewhere in there, that I'd used in a hospital room on a woman who couldn't hear me anymore. I got the blood moving. I got the warmth in. I got him rolled, and rolling a 400-pound donkey when your knees are shot is its own small war. Got him over onto his other side so the seized-up side could come back to life. And the second time he tried to stand, with the fire roaring and the dog pressed to his spine, and an old man heaving on his halter and swearing at him with tears freezing on his face. The second time, the back end came up. Wobbling splay-legged, shaking like a newborn but up. Pip stood in the middle of that cabin on 4 legs that had nearly quit forever, and he shook himself head to tail the way a horse does when it's deciding to keep going. A whole-body shudder that flung dust and bits of straw into the firelight, and he turned his white old face to me, and he made a sound. Not the moan, not the hun of giving up. A bray, a real one. Cracked and rusty and ridiculous and loud, loud enough to rattle the milky window, the absurd full-throated honk of a donkey announcing to the entire frozen mountain that he was, in point of fact, still here. Cooley scrambled up barking. I laughed, actually laughed. The first time, and I couldn't tell you how long, laughed until my chest hurt. Sitting on the floor of a dead man's cabin with a photograph in my pocket and a child's apology in my hand, and a 31-year-old donkey blaring his existence at the snow. And then I stopped laughing, because I realized 2 things at the same time. The first was that getting Pip up and getting Pip 2 miles down an iced ridge to my truck were 2 completely different problems, and I had solved only the easy one. The second was the sound. Under the fading echo of the bray, under Cooley's barking, there was another sound now, coming from outside, coming up the washed-out road that nobody used anymore. The engine got closer and then it stopped, and in the quiet after it I heard a truck door open and not close, that particular sound of someone getting out in a hurry and not bothering with the door, and then boots in the snow, 2 sets, one big and one small, coming fast and breaking through the crust the same way mine had, crunch, crunch, up toward the cabin. I stood in the doorway. Cooley pressed against my leg, growling low, that uncertain growl a dog gives when he hasn't decided yet. Behind me, Pip shifted on his shaking legs, and the rope I'd cut was still trailing from his halter, and I had the brief insane thought that I should explain myself, that I was the trespasser now, an old man caught red-handed in the middle of a stranger's heartbreak. The man came around the woodpile first. 60-odd, maybe older, the kind of weathered that makes age hard to read, in a canvas coat gone shapeless with years. His face when he saw me was a war, fear, then shame, then a flat, hard readiness, the face of a man bracing to be judged, and having already judged himself worse than you ever could. And then past his hip, ducking under his arm, came the kid. Same gap-toothed kid from the photograph. Older now by a couple of years, maybe 10 or 11, in a coat too big and a knit hat pulled down crooked. And the kid's eyes went past me, past the dog, into the dim, warm cabin, and found the donkey standing there in the firelight. I have heard a person make a lot of sounds. I never heard one quite like the sound that kid made. It wasn't a word. It was just everything at once, grief and disbelief, and a hope so violent it came out sounding almost like pain. And then the kid was past me, shoved past me. I wasn't even an obstacle, I was furniture, and had both arms thrown around Pip's gray neck exactly like the photograph exactly, and was sobbing into his mane while the old donkey stood patient and swaying and turned his head to lip at the kid's crooked hat with his bad old teeth. The man stayed by the woodpile. He took his cap off, actually took it off, in 11 below cold, the way men of a certain age do at funerals and in the presence of things bigger than themselves. And he held it in both hands and he looked at me and his eyes were wet and he said, "We came back." "I see that," I said. "We were 3 hours gone." His voice came apart and he put it back together by main force the way you do. "Got to my sister's down in the valley. Got Daniel into a warm bed and a hot meal and I thought I'd done the right thing, the only thing. You can't keep a boy and an old donkey in a—" He stopped, started over. He wouldn't eat. Daniel. He just sat there. And then about an hour ago he looked at me and he said, "Grandpa, I left him in the dark." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. I knew the rest of that sentence in my own bones. I'd had a few of those myself. The thing you can't live with that you don't find out you can't live with until you've already done it. "So you turned around," I said. So we turned around. He looked at the boy and the donkey and his face did something complicated. I figured the cold. I figured I'd have to. His eyes went, just for a second, to where my rifle still leaned against the wall inside the door. And I understood that this man had driven 3 hours up an iced ridge fully expecting to bury what he'd left behind, and had come anyway, because the boy could not live with not knowing, and the man could not live with the boy living like that. "He's all right," I said. "He went down in the night. Cold cramped him up bad. I got him up. He's weak and he's old and he needs a vet to look at those hindquarters before I'd promise you anything." I made myself say the hard part because false hope is its own cruelty. He might not have many winters left in him regardless. You should know that, but the dark didn't get him. You hear me? You came back in time. The dark didn't get him. The boy heard. He turned his face out of the donkey's mane, blotched and streaming and 10 years old, and he looked at me. And then he looked down at Cooley, who had stopped growling some while back and had walked over to lean against the kid's legs in the way old dogs do, claiming people. "Your dog found him?" the boy asked. "My dog found him." I crouched down, knees one last time to the kid's level. Wouldn't stop barking. I tried to ignore him. I'm ashamed to tell you how long I tried to ignore him. I scratched Cooley behind the ear. "He's smarter than me. Most things are." The boy almost smiled. Almost. He looked back at Pip and the almost smile shook and he said, very quiet, the way kids say the thing that's actually underneath all the other things. "I wrote him a note. So he wouldn't think nobody, and that was as far as he got." "I read it," I said. "It was a good note. It was the best note I ever read." I took the folded paper out of my coat and the photograph too, and I held them out to him. "These are yours. You should keep them." He took them in both mittened hands like they might break. Getting Pip down the ridge took the rest of the daylight, and most of what the three of us had in us. I'm not going to dress it up. It was miserable, ugly work. A 400-pound donkey with shaky hindquarters does not walk down an iced-over mountain road because you love him. He walks down because 3 humans flank him and steady him and catch him when he slips and let him stop and blow and tremble every 50 yards. And because a kid walks backward in front of him the whole way holding the lead rope and talking to him. An unbroken stream of "Come on, Pip, good Pip, almost there, Pip. You remember the truck. You like the truck." None of it true. The donkey had never seen the truck, but the kid's voice was the thing Pip walked toward. The way the kid's voice had probably been the thing Pip walked toward his whole long life. The snow came down the whole way. Not the killing kind. The other kind, fat and slow and almost gentle. The kind that quiets the world down to the crunch of your own steps and the white noise of falling. Cooley ranged ahead and circled back, ahead and back, herding us all down the mountain like it was the most important thing he'd ever done, which, at 12 years old, it may well have been. We got Pip into the back of the man's truck, an old stock trailer, dented to hell, that he'd hitched up before driving back, because he'd planned for the good outcome even while bracing for the worst, and I thought that told you everything you needed to know about him. We got the ramp up. The donkey stood in there blowing and shaking and pressed his white face to the slats, and the boy stood on the bumper with his fingers through the gaps, and the snow caught in both their lashes the same. The man and I stood a minute in the blue last light by the truck. He'd put his cap back on. He stuck out his hand and I took it, and we shook the way men do who have just been through something and don't have the words and aren't going to try for them. "I don't know how to," he started. "Don't," I said. "There's no how, there isn't one." He nodded. He understood. Some debts you don't pay because paying them would make them smaller than they are, and you both know it, and you let them just stay between you, owed forever, which is its own kind of bond. "Where will you go?" I asked. He looked off down the road where it dropped toward the valley and the lights just coming on, far down there, small and warm. "Sisters for now." Then he shrugged, and in the shrug was a whole hard life I didn't have any right to ask after. "Somewhere with a fence. Somewhere a boy and an old donkey can." He stopped, and this time the stop was all right, was even good, because what came after didn't need saying. The boy called from the bumper, "Mister." "Yeah." "What's your dog's name?" "Cooley." The kid looked down at Cooley, who looked back up at him, snow on his gray muzzle, tail going slow. "Thank you, Cooley," the boy said, very serious, very formal. He didn't thank me. I noticed that and I was glad of it. He thanked the dog. The dog was the one who hadn't done any math. Then they got in the truck, the two of them and the old donkey, and the engine turned over rough and caught, and the tail lights went small and red down the mountain in the falling snow, and then around the bend in the road, and then gone. I never learned the boy's last name. I knew it was Daniel, and that's all. I never got the man's name at all. They drove down to a valley full of towns and roads going everywhere, and I went back up to my quiet house on my quiet land, and that was that. People think a story like this ought to end with a reunion years later, a letter, a photograph in the mail of a boy grown tall standing next to a fat old donkey in a green pasture somewhere. I used to think it ought to, too. It didn't. I never heard from them again. I don't know if Pip made it through that winter or the next. I don't know if the vet found something I couldn't feel with my hands. I don't get to know. That's the part nobody tells you about the things you save, that you almost never find out whether they stayed saved. But here's what I have. Cooley died that spring, old age in his sleep. On the rug by the stove where he'd slept every night of his life. 12.5 years, which is a good long run for a dog his size, and he went easy, which is more than most of us get. I buried him out by the tree line, north of the barn, where the land starts to climb, right about where he'd stood that morning and barked himself raw and refused to let me have my coffee in peace. And I'll tell you, the morning after I buried him, I stood at that same kitchen window with my coffee going cold, the way I do, the way I always have. And the place where his bark should have been was so quiet I could hear my own heart in it. But I wasn't thinking about the quiet. I was thinking about a gap-toothed kid on a truck bumper with snow in his eyelashes, thanking a dog by name. I was thinking that somewhere down in that valley, maybe, there was a boy who was going to grow up knowing, not believing, knowing in his hands and his bones that you can leave something in the dark and the dark doesn't have to win, that you can turn the truck around, that it is never, not ever, as late as you think it is. I'd spent 2 years telling myself I was done being the one who decides, done climbing ridges for things I couldn't save, done standing beside graves. Turns out I wasn't done. Turns out an old dog and an old donkey and a kid I'll never see again had a little more to teach a stubborn man about that. I still keep the rifle on the rack, but I think about that morning every time I pass it. I think about how close I came to turning around at the window, How close I came in that cabin to the easy mercy that isn't mercy at all. And every now and then, when the wind comes up the ridge at night and the dark gets that deep and total way it gets up here, I find myself standing on the porch in the cold for no reason I can name, listening.